everyone, welcome to our series Unshakable Studies in Daniel. And during this series we've looked at how 4 Hebrew young men remained unshakable in the midst of a shaking world. With all of the clamour and the chaos and the confusion that surrounded them, they somehow managed to remain steadfast and faithful. We've looked already and seen how they lived with unshakable faith. We've seen that they had this foundation that was laid deep within them, that they followed after God. We've seen that they had a big vision of God and that they had a determination to live for God come what may. We've seen that they had unshakable lives and were able to remain true to their dependence and belief and faith in God, even though every attempt was made to try and strip that away from them. Last time we looked at the unshakable kingdom and we saw how God's kingdom is truly the one that's unshakable, as other kingdoms will come and will go. And we've seen that it really is God who reveals, that it's God who reigns, and in the midst of it he reassures his people. And so today what I want us to do is look at one of the most famous stories in the Bible, probably many of our favourite story for many of us growing up, learning in Sunday school and hearing about Shadrach, Meschach and Abednego and going through the fiery furnace. It really is one of the most spectacular stories. It's one of the greatest stories that we find in the Bible. But also probably it's one of those stories that to some degree we have sanitized, maybe because we learned it in Sunday school and we maybe had different pictures, the Velcro on the board, we seen maybe images on the screen and maybe haven't fully carried the full weight and power of what these men actually went through and stood for in God. And so let's look at the story. And my heart today is we'll read through a little bit, we'll comment on it, we'll try and get some of the background and understand what's going on in the text, and then we'll bring at the end just a couple of thoughts that hopefully bring us into land. Okay, so here we go. If you have a Bible with you, if you have a pen and a notebook, that would be absolutely terrific. Daniel chapter 3, and we're going to start by reading verses 1 through 7. And it says there, King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold, 90 feet high and 9 feet wide, and he set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. He then summoned the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the other provincial officials to come to the dedication of the image that he had set up. So the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the other provincial officials assembled for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And they stood before it. Then the herald loudly proclaimed, "This is what you are commanded to do, O peoples, nations and men of every language. As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the zither, the lyre, the harp, pipes, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace." Therefore, as soon as they heard the sound of the horn, the flute, zither, lyre, harp, and all kinds of music, all the peoples, nations, and men of every language fell down and worshipped the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So let's have a wee look at the statue and state. This is what really is going. Let's have a look at what's really going on. So Nebuchadnezzar decides to build a monument. It's 90 feet high and 9 feet wide. So probably quite a narrow, slim looking, but incredibly tall and imposing statue or obelisk. This kind of thing, we're not sure whether it was of him or of a god or what it may have been, but it was a focal point for people to recognize his rule, his reign, his kingdom, and the state of Babylon. And we might ask, why was he doing this? Well, if you remember what we looked at last time, and it was the vision, the dream that he'd had, where God had revealed to him that his kingdom wouldn't last, that there would be other kingdoms that would come, that he was the gold head, but that there were others beneath. And so, whilst it doesn't explicitly say this, I think it's reasonable to assume that part of what Nebuchadnezzar is doing, that although at the end of chapter 2 he recognizes Daniel's God and he worships him to some degree, And there's a deeper inner drive that's going on within Nebuchadnezzar. You see, this dream that his kingdom would at some time come to an end. This is not good news for a despot king, a legacy-seeking, wanting your name written in the stars type of person. This is not the news that he wanted to hear. So this inner drive drives him towards trying to fight against that message, trying to hold up a fist to God and to anyone else who would try to speak anything other than his own will over his life. It's like he wants to be the master of his own destiny, and he's going to do it no matter what any God, no matter what any dream, no matter what anybody else is saying. And so it seems to me that Nebuchadnezzar has gone into fight mode. He's gone into fighting the message, gone into fighting God, gone into fighting and saying nobody's going to conquer. And so he creates not just an image with a golden head, an image that is top to bottom gold. Now, they probably think it was plated in gold, but this is the point that he's making. It's a fist in the face of God. It's a fist in the face of the message. And it's I will not lose my name. I will not lose my fame. I am going to be the greatest that there ever was. And so it's reasonable to assume that that's what he's doing. He's in fighting mode. He's fighting his fear, and I see a lot of fear in Nebuchadnezzar here. He's fighting his fear of losing. He's fighting his fear of not having the legacy that he dreams of. He's fighting the demands of anyone else who would seem to assert any will or mastery over him, even if that be God. He's saying, no, I'm the master of my own destiny. And so he sets about a plan, and it's a plan to win. This is what he's trying to do. He's flailing around, and isn't that what we do whenever we're fearful? I have lots of images of times whenever we've fallen maybe, or somebody jumps off a diving board for the first time, and the legs and the arms are flailing. Why? What are we doing in those moments? We're looking for control. We're looking to grab hold of. It's like the earth has been taken away from us. We're falling and we're not in control, so we're trying to gain control. And I see that's what Nebuchadnezzar's trying to do here. He's flailing, he's grabbing, he's fighting for his life. And so he builds the statue in defiance of God and for the elevation of his own name and fame. His desire is to unite the kingdom under one symbol. This statue is the focal point to unite the kingdom under his symbol, him, the state, Babylon. Now, notice what he's not doing. He's not outlawing all other religions. He's not outlawing all other thoughts. He's not saying you all need to become and look like me. But what he is saying is that whatever your religion, whatever your creed, whatever your nationality, whatever your background might be, you need to come and you need to bow. You need to bow under this statue. That every creed, religion, nationality comes in underneath this one focal point. And the key word there is under. Under the banner of Nebuchadnezzar. Judaism and all of the other religions that may be represented, your creed, your colour, your nationality. Yeah, you can be all of that, but first it needs to be this. First it's Nebuchadnezzar, first it's Babylon, everything to bow under that one priority and that one thing that needs to be first. The first and loyalty and allegiance needs to be given to him. And this is what he's saying, needs to be given to him. Therefore, if there's a contradiction, say for example, between your faith and what Nebuchadnezzar's saying, guess what he's saying? Well, you need to bow to me, not your faith. If your faith says one thing, but he says another, then bow. If your faith says, well, you should do this, well, he says, no, if I'm saying that you shouldn't do it, then you need to bow. If your faith says you shouldn't do something, but I say that you should, then he's saying bow. So whatever it is, you need to bow. Bow to me first, then all of these other things can take up secondary priority within your life. And it's amazing that it's got this undercurrent as well. So he's thrown a big festival, but there's this undercurrent of bow or burn. Because he's saying, bow, it's going to be great, bow. But if you don't, there's a fiery furnace. It reminds us a little bit of the intolerance of the tolerance movement that we're seeing today. We'll say maybe a bit more about that in the times to come. So, we see that this isn't just an ancient problem. It'd be very easy to look back and go, well, that's just then. We've grown from there. We've grown on from them. But actually, we see this mentality going through probably nearly every sphere of culture that we find ourselves in. It's not just an ancient problem. We see versions of this in many cultures. So this totalitarian approach, we've seen it last century with the Nazi movement, with the communist movement, with those who declare that the state or the leader of the state is above all things. So the idea of Mother Russia, the idea of Nazi Germany, Heil Hitler, it's that idea of we're giving preeminence and first place. Everything else must bow to these leaders or to the state. And we've seen the trouble that brought. We see in modern day China and North Korea and similar states, this same idea where the ruler is given almost divine attributes and they must be followed and never questioned. However, let's not just look away and say, well, it's just them, but it's also close to home in the West. You see, it's a lot more subtle, and it may not be centered around one leader or one person, but we see this in the culture that we live in today. It's seeped through. It's seeped through into the pluralistic culture that we have. What does that mean? Many religions, many ways to God. There's many ways to live. This tolerance and PC culture that we have. And the culture that we live in today is more and more said, hey, listen, it's okay. It's okay to do your thing as long as it doesn't challenge the gods of self, freedom, materialism, consumerism. What are they saying? It's very much our culture saying what Nebuchadnezzar's saying. I will be the master of my own destiny. You can do what you like as long as it doesn't impinge on that. And it's a flying fist in the face of anybody who would seek to say anything other than that. Think about it. Think about the culture that we live in today. You see, we can do our Christian thing, but when it contradicts, then the culture wants us to bow. When what we believe contradicts what culture is saying, then the culture is saying you must bow down. You see, we can go to church and worship in general, and I know things are restricted at the moment, but that's because of the pandemic. But in general, we're able to go and we're able to do church, we're able to worship, but don't talk about sin. Don't talk about the things that we want to do. You see, even Facebook and YouTube, there's talk of new algorithms being put in to those programs that whenever even we upload things like this and we upload church services, that they will cut out moments and they'll delete or mute moments when there is hate speech. And hate speech is becoming more and more, even just if we would speak against abortion, or if we would speak against same-sex marriage, or we'd speak about anything to do with sex or sexuality, or we would impinge on gender identity, or we would in any way speak against anybody's right to be the master of their own destiny. We see the same threads flowing through this. In fact, it's incredible. And as I was preparing this, I was reminded of a statement that was made in the House of Commons by the then David Cameron. Now, it was around the Church of England, and they had voted against women being bishops. Now, a wee subnote, I'd be all for women being bishops. I'm all for women in leadership in the church. But that comes from a theological point of view. It comes from the Bible, not a cultural thing that I would be interpreting that through. However, the then Prime Minister, David Cameron, I'm pretty sure it wasn't a theological comment, but in the House of Commons, challenged the Church of England. And these are the words that he used. He said, they need to get with the program. Wow. If ever there was a sign of the culture being this, we want to be the masters of our own destiny, you must bow. If ever there was, you've got to get with the program. Wow. So, as God followers, we find ourselves living in a world where to some degree or another, this is in the frame, the pressure to bow. So let's read on, Daniel 3, 8 to 12. And it says there, at this time some astrologers came forward and denounced the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. You have issued a decree, O king, that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, lute, zither, the lyre, harp, pipes, and all kinds of music must fall down and worship the image of gold, and that whoever does not fall down and worship will be thrown into a blazing furnace. But there are some Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meschach, and Abednego, who pay no attention to you, O king. They neither serve your gods nor worship the image that you have set up. And so comes the accusation. Firstly, I want you to notice that the three friends, often again the Sunday school picture is of these hundreds of people all bowing and three friends in the middle standing proud. I'm not sure that's the picture that we get here. It doesn't seem like the three friends were protesting. It wasn't like they were lobbying or throwing stones at the musicians. It doesn't even seem that their protest was standing out hugely, because Nebuchadnezzar or his senior officials hadn't noticed that they didn't stand or that they hadn't bowed. But it's brought to his attention. It's brought to his attention. And it's brought to his attention by a group of Chaldeans, and that's important. A group of Chaldeans who, it's nearly, there's almost racist overtones here. It's like, oh, they've come in and they've got our jobs, they've got our position, and so king, these people that you've set up, there seems to be a little bit of that going on. But one thing is for sure, they're opportunists. They're taking the opportunity to pull Shadrach, Meschach, and Abednego down in order to curry favour with the king. O king, O king. Just a side note, if we ever find ourselves in a position where we're having to pull others down to lift ourselves up, we're on dangerous ground. So they come with the accusation, and it's a mix of truth and lies. He says, you've set them over. You have set them over. Now, what do we read into that? Well, what I read into that is almost like, oh, look what you've done for these people, and look how they're repaying you. It's got those sort of overtones. And then they say, but they pay no attention to you, O king. That's a lie. That's not true. Because they're working for the king. They're diligent in all that they're doing. They have worked so hard. They have got promotions. They've been set over a province. They are leading well. They're doing well. They're serving well within the kingdom. So there's a lie here. They pay no attention to you, O king. And then there is the truth, because he's told they serve neither your gods nor did they bow down. I hear these words ringing in my ears as I think of it. They need to get with the program, O king. Let's move on. Daniel 3, 13 to 15. And it says there, furious with rage, Nebuchadnezzar summoned Shadrach, Meschach, and Abednego. So these men were brought before the king, and Nebuchadnezzar said to them, is it true, Shadrach, Meschach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold that I've set up? Now when you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and all kinds of music, if you are ready to fall down and worship the image I made, very good. But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand? Oh. So it's amazing to see Nebuchadnezzar in this response. He's completely furious, but he uses every tactic of intimidation to get these guys to bow. Why? Again, let's try and see what's behind it. Remember, Nebuchadnezzar's goal is control. His goal is control. Control of the national narrative, control of everyone to bow, control even of these three people. He's trying to pull back control, and what he's got in front of him are three people he hasn't been able to control. Thus far, with his threats, with his scheming, with the great festival that he's throwing, he hasn't been able to control them, and he's furious. Here in front of him are faithful people who will not bow. And he uses every weapon in his armoury to try to get them to conform. He uses fury, his anger at the start of the conversation. He uses persuasion, so he brings the argument back in. It's like, come on, guys. And isn't there something really subtle at times? And I'm sure for these guys, and we maybe don't fully pick it up at times, but you know, it could nearly be the wee, come on, guys. It's just a wee bow, just bow. You can do all your own stuff. You can do all your God stuff, all your Yahweh stuff. You know, but just bow. Just no big deal. No harm, no foul. Just go and do it. And it seems so subtle. So persuasion's being used. There's like almost a reasoning. It's like, come on guys, I'm being reasonable. Like in Nebuchadnezzar, it could nearly be like, guys, I'm giving you a second chance here. Right? So we'll get guys in the music team. Come on, we're going to get going again. We're going to give these guys a second chance. Come on, we're being reasonable here. And so he tries that with them. And then it's the underlying intimidation and threat. Oh, and if you don't bow, you're going to burn. If you don't bow, you're going to be thrown into the blazing flames. And the final thing he uses is isolation. Fury, persuasion, reasoning, intimidation and threat. And isolation, because he wants them to feel like they're on their own. And he says, what God will save you from my hands? It's like, you're on your own here, guys. Make the choice. Make the decision. Bow. Let's read on. We read the response in Daniel 3:16-18. And it says there, Shadrach, Meschach and Abednego replied to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar. I want you to notice, they're not in suck-up mode. They're not in, O king. They're being straight with him. This is a real moment. O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to save us from it, and he will rescue us from your hand, O king. But even if he does not, we want you to know, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold that you have set up. Wow, what a response. Notice, it's not fearful, it's not fretting, it's not angry or presumptive. Let's open it up a little bit. Like we don't need to defend ourselves before you, O king, or Nebuchadnezzar. It's nearly like our work speaks for itself. We have served you. We've done what we've needed to do. We've been diligent. We've done well in our jobs. We don't need to defend ourselves in this. And there's also a matter of, well, we don't defend ourselves in it because we're not going to do it. We're just not going to bow. And then they come and they say, if you throw us into the furnace. So remember, they know the consequences and they're willing to pay up. They will not bow. Let's grasp this for a moment and let's pause, because again, we're so used to the story. We forget that Shadrach, Meschach, Abednego, they're real people in a real moment, in real situation, with a real fiery furnace down the road. This is real stuff. They're real people with real emotions, just like you and I would have if we could place ourselves there. They may well, by this stage, be men they may have a family. They certainly will have their own dreams and aspirations. They may have wives at home waiting for them, children depending on them to work and to bring home finances and whatever. This is not just dead easy. This is a real moment for these guys who face real loss, who face real flames, who face real uncertainty as they move forward. But they have real faith. The God whom we serve is able to save us. Wow, what a statement. What a statement. The God whom we serve is able to save us. I love it. It's just such faith and dependency and trust. But for me, this gets even deeper in verse 18. Because they say, but even if he doesn't. See, they're not being presumptive upon God. And it's not a wee, if it be thy will, kind of a, do you know, sometimes we can throw that in as a lack of faith thing. And we can go, oh, I'm not sure what God wants to do, so I'm going to cover all the bases in my prayer. I've prayed those prayers, I'm sure you have too. I don't see it being that. I just see it being, we are resolute that we're not going to bow. We believe that God can save us, but even if he doesn't, we are going to stay faithful. Wow. Come what may, we will not bow. Let's read the rest of the story. Again, let's get our Bibles and read through it. Incredible. Then Nebuchadnezzar was furious with Shadrach, Meschach and Abednego, and his attitude towards them changed. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times hotter than usual. Again, can't control them, so he's going to try and destroy them. And he commanded some of the strongest soldiers in his army to tie up Shadrach, Meschach and Abednego and throw them into the blazing furnace. So these men, wearing their robes, trousers, turbans and other clothes, were bound and thrown into the blazing furnace. The king's command was so urgent, and the furnace was so hot that the flames of the fire killed the soldiers who took Shadrach, Meschach and Abednego. And these three men, firmly tied, fell into the blazing furnace. Then King Nebuchadnezzar leaped to his feet in amazement and asked his advisors, "Weren't there three men that we tied up and threw into the fire?" They replied, "Certainly, O king," he said. "Look, I see four men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the fourth looks like a son of the gods." The idea is there that he looks divine. He looks divine. Nebuchadnezzar then approached the opening of the blazing furnace and shouted, "Shadrach, Meschach and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here." So Shadrach, Meschach and Abednego came out of the fire, and the satraps, prefects, governors and royal advisors crowded around them. They saw that the fire had not harmed their bodies, nor was a hair on their heads singed. Their robes were not scorched, and there was no smell of fire on them. I don't know whether you write in your Bible, but I wrote my Bible after that. I just wrote, come on, this is an incredible story. Then Nebuchadnezzar said, "Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meschach and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted in him and defied the king's command and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. Therefore I decree that the people of any nation or language who say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meschach and Abednego be cut into pieces and their houses be turned into piles of rubble, for no other God can save in this way." Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meschach and Abednego in the province of Babylon. Wow, real story, really happened, incredible stuff. God not only comes to the rescue, but God comes into the fire in the midst of all that these guys are going through. And Nebuchadnezzar's left eating humble pie. Let me finish in the last moments that we have by just bringing out a few thoughts. I've entitled this sermon and this study, Unshakeable Trust. Because that's what I see in these guys. There are so many other avenues that we could go down and things that we could develop. But for me, let's have a look for the next few moments at unshakable trust. Because what I see in these guys is, firstly, they have the posture of trust. When I think of posture, as soon as I said the word, I sat up straight. The posture of trust. Often our exterior posture, it defies or reveals what is on the inside. Notice the contrast between Nebuchadnezzar in this story and these three friends. Nebuchadnezzar's flying all over the place. He's moving from this thing to that thing. He's flailing, as it were, in every way. But as we see the three friends, Shadrach, Meschach and Abednego, there's a posture of trust, of confidence. And yet, Nebuchadnezzar's the one with all the power and the authority. He holds the cards, so to speak. But he's the one who's frantic, who's fearful, who's jumping from one emotion to the other. He's all over the place. But Shadrach, Meschach and Abednego, they have a posture of trust. There's a calmness, an assurance, a confidence even. And they're the ones who are being accused and threatened with flames. They have a posture of trust. And they have a posture of trust in two areas. They have a posture of trust towards the life that they're living and everything that's around them. They stand and they don't bow. That's their posture. They stand and they don't bow. They physically stand. Emotionally, they're standing. Spiritually, they're standing tall. There's no sign of them wilting or giving in any way, shape or form. They're able to stand because they trust their God. This is not just some rebellion, some defiance, some, "Oh, we'll show you, O king." That's not the tone that's here. The tone is the trust, the posture of trust that they have towards God. They believe in their God. They trust in their God. They have learned that while circumstances and situations and the world may change, that God is faithful and steadfast. They have learned that although Nebuchadnezzar is literally holding their lives in his hands, they have learned that God holds Nebuchadnezzar in his hands. That there's a greater power at work in all that is going on. They can stand because they know their God, trust their God, and believe that He is above all things. They can stand because they know that God has got this. Whatever the circumstance and whatever the trial, that God is in control. And this is important to know, they didn't just know this in their minds. This wasn't just something that they could amen to. This was something that transitioned from their heads into their hearts. They trusted with all of their being. They were able to stand because they trusted. And so let me ask us today, are we able to stand? When trials come, can we stand? If persecution comes in its various forms, and it may come in ways where we stand out, where we don't look the same as everybody else, where we're to stand for the gospel, or to stand as Christians in this world where we might get looked at funny, or we may be viewed at differently, or we may be called other things, or we may not get a job that we had hoped for. Maybe even as we progress in society, does persecution look like there are certain jobs that we can't do as Christians because of our stance on things and our desire not to bow to some things that we find in our culture? What does it look like? Will we be able to stand? When difficulties come into our lives, can we stand? When it feels like the world is falling apart, can we stand? When the fires are licking at our heels, can we stand? Not just persecution, but all the circumstances and situations in life. Do we have a posture of trust? Can we stand? Or do we bow? Do we bow? And so people have asked me the question. I've thought about it myself. If this moment came for me, this moment that Shadrach, Meschach and Abednego are in, if that moment came for me, would I be able to stand? And I don't know. Many of us, we just don't know. We hope that we would. But here's what I usually will retort to that. And it's this. Well, are you standing now? Do you have a posture of trust now? Whatever it is you're living through now, are you doing it? Are you standing? Are you trusting? Are we trusting God now with our finances? Are we trusting God with our children? Are we trusting God with our health? Are we trusting God with the circumstances and the world around us, the things that we can't control? Are we standing now? Or even now, are we bowing? Because that's a good indication of what we'll do whenever things get tougher and tougher. Are we standing now for truth and honesty and integrity and righteousness? Are we standing now for the Word of God and the worship of the one true God? Are we standing now in those things? Because if we're standing now, then the good chance is that we'll stand then. If we're bowing now, we don't stand a chance. Do we have a posture where we're standing? A posture of trust? Do we have that posture of trust? Do we believe that God is the highest authority? That God holds our lives in His hands? That God is above whatever might come against us? So that was their posture of trust towards the world that they live in, but they also had this amazing posture of trust towards God. They believed and didn't presume. They believed and didn't presume. They had a complete posture of trust and dependence of God. You see, what did they say? Verses 17 and 18. We believe that our God can rescue us. But verse 18, so critical. But even if not, we still won't bow. We'll still stand. They weren't prepared to presume upon the rescue. They knew God was good. They knew God could. But hey, that's up to God. The miracle, that's up to God. Ours is to stand. Ours is to stand. They weren't presuming on God for the outcome, but trusting Him whatever happened. This wasn't, we'll trust Him because we'll know we'll get the miracle. This was, we'll trust Him even if the miracle doesn't come. Their belief in God wasn't dependent on everything working out the way they had hoped or dreamed or expected. Their trust is dependent on God. See, I think that's real faith. Whether we get the miracle or not, whether we get what we had hoped for or not, whether it turns out the way we had hoped or not, still we trust Him. Still we worship. Still we give our allegiance to Him. And we will not bow. And I think that's what we see in the book of Hebrews. We don't have time at the moment, but if you look through that hall of fame of faith of the people of God, there are some great miracles, great things that happened. And there are others. And they get lauded for their faith. even though they were flogged, even though they died in the flames, even though, because they remained faithful. Faith is not just when we see the miracle, but when we trusted even when the miracle didn't come. Do we have a posture of trust? Do we stand and not bow? Do we believe no matter what the outcome? The posture of trust. Because when we have a posture of trust, we get peace. The peace of God. And my time is going, so I'm going to fly through this really quickly. But again, contrast, Nebuchadnezzar, flailing. Emotionally, he's a roller coaster. He's all over the place. And yet there's a peace with Shadrach, Meschach and Abednego. There's a restfulness on their lives. Why? Because they've trusted. One of my favourite scriptures is found in Isaiah 26, verse 3 and 4. And it says that you will keep in perfect peace those whose minds are steadfast and who trust in you. Trust the Lord forever. For the Lord himself is the rock eternal. He will keep in perfect peace him whose mind is steadfast. I see in this passage perfect peace. And so you say, Alistair, but I don't know. I haven't got perfect peace. Can I ask if you got perfect trust? And that might seem harsh. But this is what we see in Scripture. He will keep in perfect peace him whose mind is steadfast and who trusts in you. Are we trying to control things that aren't ours to control? Are we trying to grab on and flail? And maybe we need to learn to trust in God and leave what we can't control over to him. The song comes to mind. Many of us will have sung in Sunday school or even before in church. Because he lives, I can face tomorrow. Because he lives, all fear is gone. And it's this line. Because I know who holds the future. And life is worth the living just because he lives. I was walking the dog this morning, and it was just going on in my head. Because he lives. Can we allow the rest of the trusting life to overcome us tonight? Can we allow the posture of peace, the posture of trust, to lead us to peace today? And finally, we've got the posture of peace, or the posture of trust that leads to peace. But we remember that there's also the person. You see, when they're in the fire and they're in the furnace, in the midst of their trial, in the midst of their difficulty, there's this standout moment. There was another in the fire. Strike up the music, guys. There was another in the fire. And it's just finishing with this devotional thought. As believers, as God followers, as Jesus followers, we need to understand that as we live in this world that is hostile to the gospel, as we live in this world that brings circumstances and storms and difficulties and trials of all kind, we need to understand today that whether we're through the fire or whether we're taken out of the fire, whether we're rescued or we have to go through, whatever it might be, here is the assurance that we have today, that there's another in the fire. Are you going through stormy trials today? Are you going through difficulties today? Remember, there's another in the fire. You are not alone. Nebuchadnezzar tried to isolate these guys. What God will be able to save you? It's like you're on your own, you're standing alone, but you need to know today you're not isolated, you're not on your own. God is the one who saves. You are not alone. There's another in the fire, whether that's today or tomorrow or the circumstances that are to come. There is another in the fire. So we finish. You see, Nebuchadnezzar in this passage, he laid down the gauntlet to God. He said, what God would rescue you from my hands. And the message from this story is that Yahweh, our God, he shouts loud and clear, what God? This God. This God rescues and redeems. This God comes into the fire and walks through it with you. This God can be trusted. This God brings perfect peace. So may we today have the posture of trust. May we know the peace that flows in that trust. And may we experience the company and presence of God in the midst of whatever fiery trial we are going through or will go through. May God bless you today as we endeavour to have unshakable trust.